Crown Prosecution Service has been forced to look again at its decision not to prosecute a far-right activist with links to Nazi sympathisers whose comments had included saying that England should be freed from Jewish control. His name is Jeremy Bedford Turner. This is him speaking at an event in London in 2015.
So let's step back, close our eyes, open them again, and look at the world as it really is. Let us look at the problems of this world and look at their source. Let us call a spade, a dog, a rat, our democracy, a shambles. Tony Blair, a war criminal. Tony Blair, Jewish puppet extraordinaire.
The legal action was brought by the Campaign Against Antisemitism, who say they're increasingly concerned that the CPS is failing to take anti-Semitic crimes seriously. They say of the over 15,000 hate crimes prosecuted by the CPS in 2015, only 12 were prosecutions of anti-Semitic hate crime. Let's talk now to our legal correspondent, Clive Coleman, also Senior Rabbi Laura Jana Klausner from Reform Judaism, and Gideon Falter, Chairman of the Campaign Against Antisemitism, who brought that legal action, as I said. Clive, first of all, the background to this man and what else he was saying.
Well, you got a flavour of it there. The other things he said, it was quite a long speech, but he also said that the French Revolution and the First and Second World Wars were massacres that were perpetrated by the Jewish people. So that gives you a sense of the speech. And what happened was that the Crown Prosecution Service, obviously there is evidence because the speech was filmed, it's been posted on YouTube, so it is there and it has been transcribed. With that evidence, examining it, the Crown Prosecution Service decided that they would not prosecute him for incitement to racial or religious hatred. There was then an application for what's known as a victim's right of review. That's a right that any potential victim of a potential crime has to ask the CPS to reconsider that decision. Of course, they will apply their normal test with prosecution. They will look at the evidence and see whether there is a realistic prospect of conviction, and if there is, whether it is in the public interest to do so. Now, having declined to prosecute and declined the victim's request for a victim right to review, then the Campaign Against Antisemitism sought to bring a judicial review, to judicially review both of those decisions. And I understand that it was this week, just before that, they were successful in that, and it was just before the full judicial review was to take place, that the Crown Prosecution Service agreed that they would get a senior lawyer to review the original decision not to prosecute. And the reason for that, they say, is that they had advice from a senior lawyer in relation to the consideration of the human rights aspects of the prosecution, and it was that has forced them to rethink.
Can I talk more broadly with you two, if I may, about anti-Semitic hate crime generally, and the figures that I mentioned in the introduction from 2015. Gideon, what sort of a year was it for anti-Semitic hate crime?
Well, we rely on police statistics, and according to the police statistics, it was the worst year on record. We obviously don't have the statistics yet for 2016, but there was a 26% rise in anti-Semitic crime, and within that there was a 51% rise in violent anti-Semitism. So what we're seeing is the continued shift from anti-Semitic hate speech and incitement through to actual acts of violent anti-Semitism. So for there to have only been 12 prosecutions for anti-Semitism in that year is absolutely staggering. And
why do you think that is?
Well, I don't know why. I'm listening to the important thing that it has doubled, and that is very worrying. But it also needs to be taken in context that as a whole, Jews live in Britain very happily and safely.
Well, when you look at those figures, one would have expected more prosecutions, a higher number than 12.
We work very closely with the Home Office, we work very closely with Downing Street. None of that helps when you actually get to the lower levels of the machinery. So the police who were surrounding him when he made the speech outnumbered him about 15 to 1. They failed to make an arrest. Not only that, but they also failed to clock that a crime was taking place in front of them until we reported it. The Crown Prosecution Service, which is supposed to be dealing with these cases, is failing abjectly to actually bring prosecutions. We're constantly being contacted. In this case, it was unusual because I was actually there. I was actually the victim, and I was able to make that complaint. And I assumed that as the person who runs the leading campaign against anti-Semitism in the UK, I assumed that this would be taken very seriously and acted on. And the fact is, we've had to fight for nearly 2 years just to get to this point.
Can I just say, you know, we have to say alleged crime. What the Crown Prosecution Service have to do is they have to, it's a balancing act, and someone said it's a difficult balancing act because of course there is Article 10 of the Human Rights Act, which gives the right to freedom of expression. Now that has to be balanced against Article 17 of the Act, which essentially prohibits someone from exercising rights if they're going to be, as it were, extinguishing the rights of others across the Human Rights Act. So, you know, it is a balancing act for them, but they have obviously taken on board the fact that they didn't give enough consideration to Article 17, and they will be looking at that now in carrying out that balancing act.
I think there are two main questions which need to come out of this. The first is, how on earth was it necessary that we should have to take this action in order for the CPS to reconsider its decision? Why is it that Jews have to fight so hard to obtain justice? And the second...
Why do you think that is?
Well,
put aside the CPS, I mean, why do you think broadly you feel that you have to fight harder than others for justice?
Anti-Semitism, I don't believe in a hierarchy of prejudices, but anti-Semitism is certainly different. And anti-Semitism casts Jews not as inferior in the way that most prejudices do. It casts Jews as superior. You heard what Jeremy Bedford-Turner said there, that we're controlling everything, that we are behind society's every ill.
So there's something more acceptable about that kind of abuse?
Indeed, and it disguises itself also very subtly. So a lot of what Jeremy Bedford-Turner said was directed at Jewish conspiracy as the State of Israel, for example. People, not just on the far right, but also on the far left, and also Islamic extremists, all use this coded language to refer to Jews. And I suppose the second question that comes out of this as well, which is important,
briefly, please,
is that the CPS got this point of law so badly wrong for 2 years until they hired a senior QC to defend the case, and he told them that they just couldn't win.
Okay. Thank you all. Thank you very much for coming on the programme. Thank you.
Thank you.